Hello, I'm environmental speaker Kathryn Blume. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm coming to you from Charlotte, Vermont, which is the ancestral home of the Abenaki people. The good folks at the International Yoga Festival and Health Expo have generously invited me to contribute to the conversation about clean energy here on World Nature Conservation Day, which I am so happy and honored to do. I want to say right up front that when we're talking about energy, nature conservation, and inevitably climate change, we're also putting ourselves right into the middle of conversations about social, environmental, and economic justice. And if we're going to do that, we definitely need to know who's doing the talking. So I want to position myself as a white, cisgendered, well-educated woman who is financially stable and able-bodied. I'm also from the United States, and I've lived my entire life in politically liberal communities on both sides of the country. Now, while this is ostensibly a conversation about clean energy, I think it's almost more important to take a look at why we need clean energy, which is, of course, because most of our generated energy isn't clean at all. In fact, it's killing us. Primarily, we're talking about fossil fuels, coal, oil, natural gas, which make up about 82% of the world's energy sources. Fossil fuels are all essentially ancient biomass, which got laid down and compressed over hundreds of millions of years into a highly concentrated and highly combustible form of carbon. When you burn it, huge quantities of energy get released, allowing you to do far more work than a human being could do on their own. Basically, a liter of oil contains the energetic equivalent of about a month's worth of human labor. Rob Hopkins, who is a founder of the Transition Town movement, which is all about helping communities reduce fossil fuel use and build resilience in the face of climate impact. Rob talks about fossil fuels as the real world equivalent of 7-league boots, which are magical tools from European folklore that allow you to travel 7 leagues, which is about 21 miles, with every step. However, as we've learned from folklore, all magic has a price. And in the case of fossil fuels, the price has been pollution, the poisoning of our land, air, and water, an explosive and extremely detrimental release of greenhouse gases, and a brutal form of winner-take-all capitalism in which the maximization of profit vastly outweighs maintaining environmental integrity, the coherence of the global ecosystem, and the health and social well-being of many, many people, primarily those with Black and brown bodies. All over the world, from inner city kids in the US suffering from epidemic levels of asthma, to the desperately polluted and economically ravaged Niger Delta, to tiny Pacific Island nations like Tuvalu, which are being inundated by climate change caused rising sea levels, to the barren tar sands of Alberta, to the fracking poisoned and flammable groundwater of Pennsylvania, to the opaque air and days-long traffic jams of China's industrial cities. We are all paying the price of having massaged fossil fuels into every aspect of our systems of food and energy production, transportation, housing, and the creation of cheap, disposable consumer products. Of course, it's not even just fossil fuels. From poisonous uranium mines on Navajo land to giant hydroelectric projects flooding First Nations lands in Quebec, our endless hunger for energy sources has added a great deal of insult to imperialist and capitalist injury. And not to belabor the point, but I haven't even started talking about the ubiquity of plastic, which of course is made from oil. Great Pacific Garbage Patch, anyone? Well, look, I don't want to be doom and gloom about this. In fact, most of my career has been about articulating these issues in a way that gets people inspired and excited to work for solutions. And speaking of solutions, I would encourage you to check out Project Drawdown for detailed articulations of so much of what's possible. However, there's no denying that the climate crisis is here. It's severe, it's immediate, and it is showing no signs of slowing down. And to be precise about where we are, pre-industrial levels of atmospheric CO2 ran about 285 parts per million. A part per million is sort of like a drop of water in a tank of a car's gas tank. James Hansen, who was the former chief climate scientist from NASA, said the safe upper limit for CO2 in the atmosphere is 350 parts per million, which is where the International Climate Action Group 350.org got its name. Current levels are at 412 parts per million and climbing. And that is just carbon dioxide, which is the most prevalent but hardly the most impactful greenhouse gas. But the reality is, we're in it. Weather systems have gotten more extreme and more erratic. We have pretty much broken the Arctic when it comes to the cover of sea ice. And we've blown through many of the scientifically articulated tipping points on the road to making this planet a less than habitable place for humans and the millions of species which can't adapt fast enough to the endless challenges and changes that they're being hit with. In fact, we are in the middle of the planet's sixth great wave of extinction. There have been 5 before this one. 5 times in the history of the planet, almost all life has been wiped out. But it's worth noting that these events were caused by things like asteroids and volcanoes. This one is on us, and it could be us. Although I have to say, I lay particular blame at the feet of the fossil fuel industry, which knew about the climate change science for decades, hid it, and funded the deniers and the obfuscators. This is one of the reasons why divesting from the fossil fuel industry is so important. So we have got this gorgeous little planet hanging in the infinite blackness of the universe, and we are totally messing it up. What do we do? Well, fortunately, because this is an all hands on deck kind of situation, there are plenty of opportunities for everyone to participate in working for solutions from wherever their particular passions and areas of expertise lie. And we really can work on everything. We can change the narrative about who we are as a people. Are we creators or are we consumers? And how do we talk about that? We can think about shifting what we value. Are we about dominating each other with status and power, or are we here to build just, inclusive, resilient, sustainable communities? We can take on issues like reimagining urban planning, which is really about the design of where and how people live, work, and play, and how they get around to do all that stuff. We can transform our systems of industrial agriculture and move from our food being grown out of season in mass quantities and shipped around the world to relocalizing our food production and building small agricultural systems which operate in harmony with the seasons, which build soil, clean water, and repair the land. We can create circular economies which operate on cradle to cradle design, meaning that everything which gets made, from clothes to buildings to gadgets, gets reused or recycled, which eliminates waste and conserves resources. And we can look directly at where the energy which powers all these efforts comes from wind energy to wave energy to microhydro to geothermal to solar. We can create forms of energy production that are appropriately sited, locally owned, and which benefit the greatest number of people at the expense of none. Of course, one of the challenges when we're talking about green energy is that nothing comes close to matching the 7 league boots of fossil fuel, except perhaps nuclear, and we haven't really solved the problems of the poisonous nature of uranium mining and what to do with spent fuel, which remains dangerously radioactive for generations. Problem is, there really isn't a way for us to do a one-to-one replacement of bad energy for good. And the global population is growing at a dramatic rate, which means more people making more demands for more energy and resources. So I think what this all really means is that we have to shift back around and focus on the work of the spirit, which is at the heart of what the International Yoga Festival and Health Expo is all about. We have to examine very deeply everything from our fear of death to what we think we need to live a happy and productive life. This is a big part of what the practice of yoga is for. You know, a few years ago, I had a huge health crisis. My appendix exploded and I ended up in the hospital with sepsis. They had to do a huge operation to get me cleaned out. I almost died, and it was months and months and months of recovery. Endless weeks on the couch, just waiting for my body to repair itself. And here's my cat and I, we were learning how to knit, sort of. And I learned so much from that whole experience. In particular, I found out that healing is a process over which we have very little control, whether it's our bodies or our local ecosystem or an impacted community or the entire planet. The best we can do is set focused intentions, create the most positive environment for healing that we can, and then let the process unfold as it will. This means that healing becomes an act of clarity, patience, and faith. Often it's planting seeds for a garden or seedlings for a forest that you might not ever see, or staying open to outcomes that you can't anticipate, but you do it because it's right, You do it because taking positive action is the most hopeful thing you can do. There are so many people around the world who've dedicated themselves to replanting forests, or restoring grasslands, or cleaning up watersheds, or fighting for just transition. And really, you never know. But what happens is often amazing and totally unexpected. Sort of like when they reintroduced wolves to Yellowstone National Park, it kicked off a positive feedback loop, which led to increased species diversity and the stabilization of whole river systems. It's an astounding story. Another thing I learned after months of sitting on the couch, staring out the window, waiting for my tissues to recongeal, was just how little I can live with and be happy. You don't need nearly as much as you think you do to give your life meaning and value. In the world of yoga, there are actually 8 limbs of the yogic practice, and they're all designed to help people along the path to spiritual liberation. There's asana, which was what happens on the yoga mat, and meditation and breathing practices and sense withdrawal and a whole bunch of other stuff. While I was healing, I couldn't get on the mat. I couldn't even touch my toes. I was on serious pain meds, and I couldn't focus enough to meditate. Couldn't do much breath work because my abdomen was so wounded from the surgery. So I turned to the limb known as the niyamas, which are more about personal practices. And one of the niyamas is something called santosha, which means contentment in Sanskrit. I made contentment my practice. The light in the sky, the wind blowing through the trees, the music I loved, the dandelions on the lawn, little homegrown weed, small bowl of rice. That was it for a long time. And for a long time, it was enough. Which is all to say that, of course, the world needs abundant, exuberant, dedicated, visionary activity on its behalf. Land needs restoring, waters need cleaning, people need healing, inventions need inventing, and so much more to help us all live with each other for as long as the planet will last, which is until the sun eventually explodes in about 1 billion years. But the world also needs people of love and peace, practitioners of contentment, to show us another, kinder way to be human. So, while you might not be someone who wants to take on the details of urban planning, contentment is available to everyone. And so, many blessings upon you all, no matter what path you take. Happy World Nature Conservation Day, and namaste. Oh, P.S. If you're looking for a way to start engaging, I will point you to the Climate Justice Alliance and the people's demands for climate justice. And those demands are a great blueprint for just transition. Thank you so much.